Hello, I'm Isabella. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe to my channel. Like my video. Are you ready to watch home decoration ideas? Let's get started.
Have you ever wondered how to incorporate vintage decor into your home? If so, you're not alone. Vintage decor has a unique charm and appeal that's hard to resist. It's about more than just aesthetics. It's about bringing a piece of history into your living space, creating a sense of nostalgia for a time gone by. There's something truly special about vintage decor. The intricate designs, the craftsmanship, the stories each item holds. It's like taking a step back in time. And the best part is, there are so many different eras that are considered vintage, from the ornate elegance of the Victorian era to the mid-century modern style of the 50s and 60s. Each era has its own distinct characteristics, its own vibe, and its own way of making a room come alive. So if you're keen to bring a touch of vintage charm into your home, this video will guide you through. Before you start decorating, it's important to understand what truly defines vintage decor. So let's dive in, shall we? Vintage decor is all about celebrating the charm and elegance of past decades. But don't mix it up with antique or retro. While they might seem similar, they're distinct in their own ways. Antiques are items that are at least 100 years old, having stood the test of time. They're often rare and valuable with a rich backstory. Retro, on the other hand, is all about the recent past. Think bright colors, bold patterns, and funky designs from the 60s to the 90s. Now, what sets vintage decor apart is its age and style. Vintage items are typically between 20 to 100 years old. They carry a sense of nostalgia, capturing the essence of their time period with their design and craftsmanship. So, what are the key characteristics of vintage decor? One is authenticity. Vintage pieces are original, not reproductions. They were made in the era they represent, making them genuine artifacts of their time. The second characteristic is quality. Vintage items were made to last, often handcrafted with detail and precision. They might show signs of wear and tear, but that's part of their charm. It tells a story of their past life, adding a layer of depth and personality to your space. Lastly, vintage decor is about individuality. Each piece is unique, reflecting the trends and tastes of its era. From Art Deco lamps of the 20s to mid-century modern chairs of the 50s, vintage decor is a treasure trove of styles waiting to be discovered. Remember, vintage decor isn't about creating a time capsule. It's about blending the old with the new, creating a space that is timeless yet trendy, comfortable yet chic. Once you can identify vintage decor, you're ready to start incorporating it into your home. So let's get started on this exciting journey of discovering and decorating with vintage charm. Finding authentic vintage pieces is an adventure in itself. This is where the thrill of the hunt meets the joy of discovery. To find the best vintage decor, you've got to know where to look. Thrift stores are one of the most accessible sources. These treasure troves are filled with a wide variety of items, from antique furniture to vintage lamps. The key to thrift store shopping is consistency. Check back often, as new items arrive daily. Flea markets are another goldmine for vintage decor. They often house a myriad of vendors selling everything from rustic farm tables to mid-century modern chairs. Flea markets can be overwhelming, so go in with a plan. Make a list of items you're seeking and set a budget. Online marketplaces like Etsy and eBay have revolutionized the way we shop for vintage decor. These platforms allow you to search for specific items, periods, or styles. But remember, photos can be deceiving. Always read the description thoroughly and ask the seller questions if necessary. Estate sales are essentially treasure hunts within someone's home. They're great for finding high-quality vintage pieces that have been well cared for. Look for estate sales in older neighborhoods or homes that have been in the same family for generations. Now, it's not just about finding these vintage pieces, but also making sure they're worth your investment. This is where research comes into play. Before making a purchase, do a quick online search of the item. Look at its historical value, the condition it's in, and how much similar items are selling for. And don't forget that the best part of sourcing vintage decor is the journey. It's about stumbling upon an item you love, learning its story, and giving it a new home. Every piece you find has a history and character that new items just don't have. With some patience and persistence, you'll be able to find unique vintage pieces that fit your style and budget. So get out there and start your vintage decor adventure. You never know what you might find. Now that you have your vintage pieces, it's time to introduce them into your home. Incorporating vintage decor into your living space is an art that allows you to express your personal style while honoring the past. The beauty of vintage decor is its versatility. You can incorporate it into any room, from the kitchen to the bedroom, creating a unique atmosphere that speaks to your taste and character. Starting with the living room, a place where we entertain guests and unwind with family, vintage decor can add an air of sophistication. Consider placing a vintage coffee table at the center, or perhaps an antique mirror on the wall. They would instantly become conversation starters, infusing the room with a sense of history and charm. In the kitchen, think about using vintage dinnerware or displaying an antique clock. They can bring a warm, nostalgic vibe to the heart of your home. The dining room, too, is a perfect place for a vintage chandelier or a rustic dining set. The blend of the past and present can result in a dining experience that's both intimate and stylish. Moving on to the bedroom, vintage decor can transform this space into a tranquil retreat. A vintage armoire or a classic vanity table can add an element of romance and elegance. Pair these with modern bedding to create a harmonious blend of old and new. Now let's discuss how to mix vintage with modern decor. The key is to strike a balance. Too much vintage might make your home look like a museum, while too much modern could overshadow the vintage pieces. Start by choosing one or two vintage items as focal points, then complement them with modern elements. For example, a mid-century sofa could be paired with a sleek contemporary coffee table, or a vintage rug could be laid under a modern dining set. Remember, vintage decor should enhance your space, not overwhelm it. Don't be afraid to experiment and move things around until you find the perfect arrangement. Also, it's okay to mix different eras. A Victorian-era lamp could sit perfectly well next to a 60s modernist chair. The contrast can create an eclectic, curated look that's uniquely yours. Another tip is to use vintage decor as a focal point. This could be a large piece like a vintage cabinet or a collection of smaller items like vintage picture frames. These pieces can draw the eye, adding depth and interest to your space. Lastly, don't forget about lighting. Vintage lighting fixtures, whether it's a retro floor lamp or a crystal chandelier, can set the mood and highlight your vintage decor. Remember, the goal is to create a balance between the old and the new, making your home feel both comfortable and stylish. Vintage pieces often require a bit more care than modern items. But don't let this deter you. The charm and character these pieces bring to your home make the effort worthwhile. When it comes to caring for vintage decor, regular maintenance is key. The first step in this process is a gentle clean. Avoid harsh chemicals and abrasive tools that could damage the item's surface. Instead, opt for a soft cloth and mild soap, gently wiping away any dust or grime. Next, keep your vintage decor out of direct sunlight, as prolonged exposure can cause colors to fade and materials to deteriorate. Also, be mindful of temperature and humidity levels. Extreme conditions can cause materials like wood and metal to warp or rust, so try to keep your pieces in a stable environment. Now let's talk about repairs. Small chips, scratches, or loose parts may need some attention. If you're handy, you might be able to make these repairs yourself. But for more significant damage, or if the piece is particularly valuable, it's best to consult a professional. They'll have the expertise to restore your decor to its former glory, preserving its vintage charm while ensuring it's sturdy and safe to use. Lastly, remember that part of the appeal of vintage decor is its history. Each piece tells a story, and signs of wear and tear are part of that story. So don't stress too much about making your vintage items look brand new. Instead, embrace their unique imperfections. To sum it up, caring for vintage decor involves regular cleaning, protecting it from harsh environmental conditions, and making necessary repairs. And remember, it's not about making these items perfect, it's about preserving their character and history. With proper care, your vintage decor will continue to add charm and character to your home for many years to come. Incorporating vintage decor into your home doesn't have to be daunting. We've journeyed through the fascinating world of vintage decor together, identifying its timeless charm and where to source these unique pieces. Remember, it's all about finding items that resonate with you, that speak to your personal style, and that add a dash of history and character to your space. Incorporating these pieces into your home is an art, not a science. Mix and match, play with contrasts, And don't be afraid to experiment. Vintage decor is versatile and it can complement any design aesthetic, from minimalist to bohemian. And when it comes to caring for your vintage items, remember, they've stood the test of time. Treat them with love and respect, and they'll continue to add beauty to your home for many more years. So go ahead, start your vintage adventure, and create a home that tells your unique story.